Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Vermont Legal Aid 30-minute town hall. My name is Amelia Schlossberg, and I work at Vermont Legal Aid in the Office of the Healthcare Advocate. Vermont Legal Aid is a nonprofit law firm. We help people with civil legal issues. And today we're talking about the stimulus check and civil legal issues generally are not criminal issues. So we help people with things like housing, healthcare, disability law, elder law, and tax law, and some family law. And today I'm excited to be joined by tax attorney Zach Lees. Vermont Legal Aid operates across the state. We provide free confidential help to Vermonters with civil legal issues. And although our 5 office buildings are not accepting people in person right now, we're still providing that free confidential help to Vermonters during this time. So today we're hosting this town hall to get your questions answered about the stimulus checks that are coming to Vermonters. So I will now let Zach introduce himself.
Thanks, Amelia. So my name is Zach Lees. I'm a staff attorney at Vermont Legal Aid, and for several years now, I've been working with and representing people who are dealing with tax issues in front of the IRS and the Vermont Department of Tax. Vermont Legal Aid staff have been really hard at work reading all of the new laws and regulations that have been coming out in response to the coronavirus pandemic. This includes housing, unemployment, and of course, the topic of what we're going to talk about today, stimulus checks, also what are being called economic impact payments. So today, we'd like to cover eligibility, who will get this check automatically, who may need to do something more to make sure they get their checks, and then what to watch out for to ensure that people aren't going to be scammed or defrauded, because we're really concerned about a lot of those issues that are going to be coming up as well.
Correct, yes. And we will also be answering any other questions that you have here. And just know if we don't get to your question, you can always call us to get more help. That's always an option for you. We also have our website, our webpage that is vtlawhelp.org that has lots of information on this topic. So let's get started. I see questions are already coming in. So just first, what are we talking about? So what is a stimulus check?
Yeah, so at the end of March, Congress passed what they're calling the CARES Act into law, and that provides for the rapid issuance of stimulus checks. The IRS is calling them economic impact payments, and this is the $1,200 per eligible adult check that people have been talking about and are expecting to show up in their mail or in their bank account pretty soon. So it's $1,200 per eligible adult, and then an additional $500 per eligible child under the age of 17. And we'll talk about what that may mean as well. So I think the most important thing to talk about is that this is an advanced tax credit against tax year 2020. And the reason that that's important is because 2020 is not over. So the IRS has to use information from 2018 or even 2019 tax returns. And this is important for a couple reasons. The first is that next spring, when you go to file your 2020 tax return, you're going to report the amount of stimulus check that you received based on the 2018 or 2019 tax information that the IRS had. And then you'll compare that to what you should have received based on the 2020 tax information that you're filing. This is what we call reconciliation. It's just a really simple way of comparing what you did receive with what maybe you should have received. If for whatever reason, you receive more stimulus than you should have, you will not be required to pay any of this stimulus money back. And I want to repeat that because I've heard some of this going around that, oh, you're going to have to pay back this money next year. That is totally inaccurate. The law specifically says that there is no penalty for getting more stimulus than you should have, and you will not be required to pay any of that back.
So Zach, even if I owe taxes next year, I won't owe this back. Like this won't reduce my tax refund next year and I won't have to pay this back, even if somehow I get rich and become a millionaire next year.
Yeah, so we'll talk about eligibility and the income levels and things like that. The main point here is that if you receive your stimulus check in advance, which is the checks that are coming in for people now, if for whatever reason you received more than you should have, you will not be required to pay that back next year.
Got it.
And then that brings us to the second point for why this idea of this being an advance credit on 2020 tax return information. The second point here is that if you did not get the full amount of the stimulus check that you should have, for whatever reason, let's say you had a child in 2020 and that's not going to show up on 18 or 19's tax information, you will be eligible to get that money, that rebate on your 2020 tax return. So this reconciliation process goes one way, and it goes in the benefit of the individual. So you will never be required to pay any of this back, and you will actually be eligible to get anything you were entitled to but didn't receive next year when you go to file your tax return.
So just to clarify, Zach, we're never going to have to pay this money back to the IRS. Will this money be taxed as income?
No.
Okay.
No, it's not taxable as income. It won't affect your benefit situation either, which is another question that I'm sure a lot of people will have. And I can talk a little bit about that as well. But for the reconciliation process, it goes one way and it goes to the taxpayer, which is a really good thing about this.
Great. And Zach, you just touched on another question that's coming in here that I see. How do the payments affect eligibility for Three Squares or SNAP or WIC or health insurance? And so you quickly, just a quick answer sounds like it doesn't affect that. You shouldn't report it to those benefits, but we'll talk about that more. Is that right?
Yeah, we can touch that at the end because it's a pretty simple answer. It should not affect your benefits. It doesn't count as income. And as long as you spend it within 12 months, it won't count as a resource either.
Great, thanks. Okay, so what's the next, what else should Vermonters know right off the bat?
Yeah, so I think we can go through eligibility, which might be another question that people will have. And yeah, so eligibility, there's three main considerations. First, you have to have a valid Social Security number. In the case of a joint tax return, both spouses will probably need to hold a valid Social Security number to be eligible to get their recovery rebate, their stimulus check. And then for the extra $500 per child, that child must also have a valid Social Security number as well. And when we say valid Social Security number, the term that we've seen kicking around is what they call a work authorizing Social Security number. For most people, that's not a concern, but they're, Social Security numbers get issued for a lot of different reasons sometimes. So if there's questions about that, they should certainly call us because that's a more complicated question that we can look into for you. So valid Social Security number is number one. The second thing is that you cannot be claimed as a dependent of another taxpayer. So if you were claimed as a dependent on a 2018 or 2019 tax return, that's probably going to be a big issue that we're going to see, and that's going to mess up your ability to get this stimulus check in advance. And if that's happened to you and you think that you were not allowably claimed as a dependent when you were, then that's another issue that you should call us about. So work authorizing Social Security number cannot be claimed as a dependent of another taxpayer. And then the third thing are the income limits that I think a lot of people have heard about. If you're a single person, your gross income has to be below $75,000 a year in order to receive the full $1,200. For a married couple, that's $150,000 a year. And once you hit about $99,000 a year for a single person, the amount of the check is zero. So once you're over that limit, you get zero. Between 75,000 and 99,000, there's a phase out. So you get less and less until you hit that cliff of $99,000 a year or $198,000 a year for a married couple. So those are the three big eligibility requirements. Social Security number, can't be claimed as a dependent by another taxpayer, and the income limits that we just went through. And I guess the last piece of eligibility that I'd like to talk about is this extra $500 per dependent child. The big thing there is it needs to be a dependent child in your household that you provide more than half of their support for. The critical thing is the child has to be under the age of 17 at the end of the tax year. Now, this is a little weird because this is an advance credit on 2020 taxes. So hypothetically, if your 18 or 19 tax return shows a child under age 17, hopefully you will get that extra $500 per child. And as we said, you won't have to pay that back, even if this child may have aged out by 2020. So Those
So if
are the
if someone has a dependent child that's 19 or 20, or someone has an adult disabled child that's 30 or 40, there's no way to get this stimulus check money for that person.
Yeah, correct. And that's one of the big issues here is that there is a group of people. You've got college students, children over the age of 17 that are still living at home, and maybe permanently disabled people who are being claimed as dependents. Unfortunately, they're over the age of 17, so they're not going to get an additional $500 for the primary taxpayer. And because they're also claimed as a dependent, they won't be eligible for this stimulus check either.
Got it. Okay. So I'm seeing some more general questions about, is this essentially an advance on your 2020, when you file your taxes in 2021, are you not going to get your tax refund then? Are you going to owe more taxes? So is this, if you're due a refund in 2021, is this coming out of that in advance, or is this separate from your regular 2021 refund or 2020 refund?
Yeah, it is a little confusing because this is the way we set up the government's ability to issue these checks to people. The main takeaway here is that you will not be required to pay back any of this money. You will, and in fact, you will be eligible to get any of the stimulus money that you didn't receive now. You will be eligible to get that in 2020 as a refundable credit. So you will never be required to pay any of this stimulus money back. The only issue here is that if you file a 2020 tax return, which shows that you owe, $1,000 in taxes to the IRS, a refundable credit means is that they will apply that $1,000 to what you owe in 2020, and you will get the balance of that back. So, but that's not paying back any of this stimulus money. So I just want to be very clear that as far as your stimulus check goes, you will never be required to pay this back.
Got it. And getting it now, will it reduce your tax refund later, potentially?
No.
Okay, great. Okay, that's great. So keep going. What are some other sort of general, we talked about who's qualified for this. We talked about some major groups of folks that are left out. So that would be Vermonters with disabilities that are dependents, and people over the age of 17 that are dependents.
Yeah.
What else should we know about this?
Yeah, so I think the next thing here is what do people have to do to get their stimulus check? Is there anything that I need to do to get my economic impact payment? So there, and this is being updated daily. And in fact, yesterday there was a big announcement as well. So if you filed a 2018 or 2019 tax return, you will automatically receive your stimulus check. And you will also automatically receive it if you receive a Social Security retirement benefit, Social Security disability benefit, railroad retirement benefit. And yesterday they announced that if you receive SSI, supplemental security insurance, you will get your check automatically, which is fantastic. Now, the only thing here that I want to flag is for people who receive a Social Security benefit such as SSI, SSDI, Social Security retirement, or railroad retirement benefits, the IRS doesn't have information about any qualifying dependents, like household information. So if you receive SSI, well, you may get your $1,200 check. If you've got children under the age of 17, dependents living in your household, you will need to take steps to let the IRS know that you should be entitled for that extra $500 per child.
Got it, Zach. So we have a question here that says, if someone is receiving both supplemental security income, or SSI, and Social Security disability income, SSDI, do they need to submit some kind of online form to get this? And you're saying the answer is no, unless they have a child or a dependent under the age of 17 living with them. Is
Yeah,
that correct? Okay.
That's right. And so that leads us to who needs to do something to get their check. And that's everybody who didn't file a tax return in 2018 or 2019 and doesn't get a Social Security benefit like SSI, Social Security retirement, SSDI. So if you are a non-filer and you've been required, like you've made over the filing threshold, which is about $12,200 for 2019. So if I haven't filed my 2018 or 2019 tax return yet, and I was required to file because I earned more than that threshold, then you need to file a tax return in order to get this stimulus check. And our website has some resources on what's available right now. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, a lot of the resources for tax preparation for Vermonters who may qualify for free tax prep are just not operating right now. So I would suggest you check our website first, and then if you still have more questions, you can give us a call about that. So non-filers who are required to file need to file a tax return. Veterans benefits beneficiaries, the VA has not been able to share the same information with the IRS that the Social Security Administration has. So if you receive a veterans benefit and that's your sole source of income, so these are people who are not required to file a tax return, but they're receiving veterans benefits, you will have to provide information to the IRS, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then anybody who is receiving Reach Up or General Assistance as a primary or sole source of income, the IRS doesn't have that information either, so you will have to provide your information to IRS for that as well. And so for these groups of people who are not required to file a tax return, but the IRS doesn't have their information, this is veterans beneficiaries and Reach Up and General Assistance families, you will have to use the IRS portal. And this is called the non-filer portal. And it is a online application that the IRS launched last week, which allows you to enter your information in there and register to ensure that you get your stimulus check. And this is critical because the populations that we're talking about are our most vulnerable Vermonters. These are families that have low incomes and generally don't file tax returns. So we're going to need to make sure we get the word out that if you fall into one of these categories, you will need to do something to get your stimulus check, because unfortunately the IRS just doesn't have this information.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So shall we show folks right now what that looks like, or do you want to do that in a couple of minutes?
I think that would be great. Yeah. So
Right.
the non-filer portal, and hopefully this works where we can show what the website looks like. And we refer to this on our Vermont Law Help website as well. But this is the non-filer portal.
Great.
And this allows,
So let's start here. This is www.vtlawhelp.org. I'm sharing my screen now so you can see it. And if you scroll all the way down, this has got lots of civil legal information. When you scroll all the way down here to the bottom, you can see that we have under our news section, the section on the CARES Act, COVID-19 coronavirus. So when I click on that page, it brings me to this next section that's specifically about these stimulus checks. So you'll see a lot of information here that Zach and I are going over today. So if you have any questions afterwards and you want more information, you can always come here. So when I look on this page here, I see that there's a link to the Federal Economic Impact Payment, and that's another name for this stimulus check. And when I click on it, it brings me to the IRS webpage here. And now we're worried about a lot of scams. We'll talk more later, but it's really important to make sure you get to the actual irs.gov webpage and not some webpage that's pretending to be this. So this is what it looks like. You can get to it from our website. When we scroll down a little bit, we can see that there's this portal here. And we have this portal, Zach, you've described this portal for filers to get their payments, and then for non-filers, and that's what we're talking about now, is for folks that haven't filed taxes. They can explain what, they can give their information for people under the age of 17 to make sure they get their additional $500 for those dependents under the age of 17, or if they haven't filed and they need to, and they're not required to file, they can enter their information in here.
Right. And just to reiterate, the non-filer portal is for people who may receive a Social Security benefit, who have dependent children living in their household under the age of 17, and you'll need to let the IRS know about that in order to get your extra $500 per qualifying child. And this non-filers portal is also for veterans benefit beneficiaries, Reach Up and General Assistance recipients, and people who may have earned income but were below the threshold where they would be required to file a tax return.
Got it.
So if you've not filed a tax return because you weren't required to, and the IRS doesn't have your information, you will need to input your information here.
Okay.
Now, I want to pause here because I'm sure we're going to get questions about what about all the Vermonters out there who don't have access to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, with the way the coronavirus has impacted the functioning of the IRS, they are not processing paper tax returns right now. So this means that really our only option to get the IRS the information that they need to issue these checks is to use this portal. A backup could be to a backup could be to do what's called e-filing, where you electronically file a tax return. That might get things done quicker. You could file a paper return, but it's going to take a long time for that to be processed. As I said, the good news, though, at the end of this is that if you don't get your advance check now, you will get it when you go and file your 2020 tax return.
Got it. So Zach, I want to just touch on some other quick questions that folks have here. One is just a clarification. Adults with disabilities that are not dependents are eligible themselves for this check. So folks that are receiving SSDI and folks with disabilities that aren't getting SSDI are all qualified to get this money as long as they're not considered dependents. That's right?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
great.
Yes. Now,
Okay.
yes. Sorry.
Other quick
Yes.
question. Is there anything else that would cause someone's stimulus check to be less than $1,200 other than their income level?
No.
Okay, great. Let's see if I have any other really quick answered questions. Oh, this isn't quite as quick, but if someone gets a stimulus check for someone that passed away, are they going to owe them back? What happens? For someone who passed away, or we've got two questions on that.
Yeah, so this is kind of an evolving area where you may have a one taxpayer on a joint return who's deceased. The way the law is written, it specifically says that you will not be required to owe any of this money back. So if you do get a stimulus check for a deceased taxpayer or a deceased benefits recipient, I don't believe that there is a penalty or a requirement to pay that money back.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zach. Okay, so we've talked about who is qualified for this. We've talked about what you need to do to get this if you're not a tax filer. Now we do have some questions about how the money actually is going to get to you. So there's a question here, let me just find it, that said, what if the account, so what if I have a direct deposit for my, what if the bank account that the IRS has on file for direct deposit has been closed? Will the stimulus check bounce back and be issued in a paper check?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so this is a good segue into looking at the Get Your Payment portal. So this is the second side of that IRS webpage. So you can expect to get your stimulus check in whatever form you usually get your tax refund or your benefits in. So if I file and put my direct deposit information on my 2018 or 2019 tax return, then I can expect to get my stimulus check deposited directly into that same account. If I usually get a paper check mailed to me, that's how I should expect to receive my stimulus check. Now, so the IRS will send a letter to the mailing address of the taxpayer within 15 days of issuing the stimulus check. And that letter should say, we sent you your check in this form and you should have received it, or you will be receiving it soon. And it should give you a phone number for for calling IRS if you haven't received this payment. So those are the two main things right now. Now the Get My Payment portal is.
I'm going to pull that up now, Zach.
Yeah, let's pull that up because this is kind of interesting here. So
this is the same page we brought you to before. So going to vtlawhelp.org, clicking to the page about this topic, the CARES Act, stimulus checks, and then going to this IRS webpage. And it's on the left side. This is for people that are filers that have filed their taxes.
Right.
So we'll talk about what this is for now.
So this Get My Payment portal allows people who have filed a 2018 or 19 tax return or who receive a Social Security benefit, as we talked about, to check in on the status of where their stimulus check is or may be. That's pretty much what this portal does. It also allows people who have not previously given the IRS direct deposit banking information, it will allow you to input that to get your check by direct deposit. I kind of recommend this because it is safer and you'll actually get your check quicker. So if banking is not an issue for you, then direct deposit is a really good option. The crux here is that if you've already provided a different bank account number to the IRS, this portal will not allow you to update that bank account information, unfortunately.
Okay, so we had a question about that. Mm-hmm.
So if the IRS tries to deposit a stimulus check into a bank account that's already closed, it will get kicked back and they will most likely issue you a paper check, and you will also get a letter within 15 days telling you that.
Okay.
So the other point here is that if your mailing address has changed since the last time you filed the tax return, this Get My Payment portal does not allow you to update your mailing address either, unfortunately. So it does direct you to the IRS webpage for how to change your address on record with the IRS. Unfortunately, that's a paper form, which they will not be processing right now. So if you have moved and changed addresses since the last time you filed the tax return in 2018 or 2019, there may be some other steps that you're going to have to take, and you should call us so that we can help you sort that out, because it's pretty complicated right now.
So Zach, we were going to talk about people getting scammed, because that happened a lot in 2008, 2009 with that stimulus check. Are we worried about that this time?
Yes. So in 2008, when they issued a bunch of stimulus checks, there was a lot of scam and fraud activity going on, and we expect that to be a big deal and to be even more sophisticated right now. So what this may look like is an individual getting phone calls or emails or text messages or any other form of communication from some entity purporting to be from the IRS. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get your personal information so that they can steal your stimulus payment. And what they'll do is they'll say, hey, we're from the IRS, enter your personal information here so that we can get you your check quicker. The IRS does not call you, they do not text you, they don't email you, they don't contact you on social media asking for personal or bank account information. Really, the only way the IRS communicates with people is through official correspondence, and that's pretty easy to tell if that's official or not. If you have questions, give us a call. The other concern is for people who may not understand what they need to do to get their stimulus check. There's going to be efforts by unscrupulous tax preparers and check cashing services who are going to charge high fees to prepare a tax return. Most of the time, if you're not required to file, you will not need to file a tax return. So you're pretty much wasting money, and these people are siphoning off large portions of stimulus checks to do these sorts of preparation services, which are probably not needed. So the other thing is, check cashing services charge exorbitant fees. If you're unbanked or having issues with banking, that is a really difficult situation. And we're trying to think more about how we can recommend people handle that. But, these sorts of fees for tax preparation and check cashing, we consider to be unscrupulous as well. So we want to make sure people understand what their options are.
Got it.
And yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
So I've got some more information on kind of the fraud and the scam activity that we're expecting to see and that we're already seeing. When people get calls from these sorts of scammers, you don't want to engage with them, just hang up. Any text messages or emails, you want to be very careful about what you're clicking on. And anything that's saying that we can get you your money faster or that you have an advanced check waiting for you, you just need to come claim it, that's clear indication that that's fraudulent. The IRS will not be sending those sorts of letters. Nobody can expedite your receipt of getting these checks quicker. So anybody who says that they can for a fee or anything like that, that's clearly fraudulent activity. The bottom line here is that we want to make sure people know to not provide information or bank account numbers to anyone who says they can get you this money. Don't fill out any application to get your money faster. The system does not work that way. Just follow the steps that we have on our website to ensure that you're not being defrauded or scammed in any way.
Thank you, Zach. So Zach, I'm noticing here we've made it to our 30 minutes for our 30-minute town hall. We still have a lot of questions.
Yeah.
We got 40 questions and we've answered a lot of them.
Wow.
Is there anything else you want to cover that's general information that everyone should know before we continue answering these questions as they come in that are more individual?
So I'd like to talk about collections and offset of the stimulus checks very quickly. The law specifically says that this stimulus check is not allowable to be offset for any federal or state agency debt, with one exception, and that is unpaid child support. So if you owe a tax deficiency to the IRS or the Vermont Department of Tax, they cannot offset the stimulus check to pay for that. The only debt that a federal or state agency can offset your stimulus check for is child support. So if you think that you owe a child support debt, you're going to have to call your state office of child support to find out how much you owe and how they're going to handle this.
Okay.
Now, I hope that's pretty clear, because that's usually a question that we hear a lot about. The other issue I'll flag here is that, unfortunately, there's no exemption on private debt collection for these stimulus checks. And so banks may have the right to offset this stimulus check if you have overdraft fees or any charges that you owe your bank. So I would call your bank first and foremost to make sure that you don't owe any sorts of these fees, and figure out how they're handling this. And then the other thing here is that, if you are already subject to a judgment, and if your bank account has already been subject to what they call trustee process, where a creditor has already gone through the court system and is able to reach out and take money out of your bank account, they would still be able to do that. So if you're seeing issues with that, you should call us, because I think we've got a really strong argument we can make to protect people's stimulus check. So those are the two main points I wanted to make about collection activities.
Thank you, Zach. And just, we keep saying call us, and the phone number to reach us at is 1-800-889-2047. So that's 1-800-889-2047. That's how you get civil legal aid. That's how you'd reach us to get your questions answered. And you'll probably leave us a quick voice message and we'll call you back. Like I said, you can't come in person to our offices, but we are still working to help people over the phone and by email and provide that free confidential help. So Zach, you just answered this, I think, but maybe a bit more. There's a question from Facebook here. Is anything being done in Vermont on a legislative level to address these private debt collectors from issuing a garnishment order or seizing that stimulus money as soon as it gets direct deposited?
Yeah, so we have staff members from Vermont Legal Aid working with the legislature to flag these issues. So the court system right now is effectively closed. They're only scheduling emergency hearings. So any new creditor that needs to file a motion to get a hearing in order to start collection activity, that's not going to be happening right now. Unfortunately, if you have a creditor who's already secured a judgment, they don't need a hearing to actually get trustee process on a bank account. Now, we believe that this is a pretty rare situation. If it's happening to you, your bank usually will notify you. If you have already had a judgment entered against you, you could also call us to figure out what your potential exposure is there. But in terms, so I think the bottom line here is that any new collection activity is going to have a very hard time proceeding. It's the people who already have judgments secured against them that I think need to be a bit concerned about how that may impact their stimulus check. And that's pretty complicated. So we would appreciate them to call us and we can work with them to try and sort through that.
Got it. Thank you, Zach. So it sounds like that is the end of our general information we want to get across, and we still have a lot of questions. So we'll keep answering them as long as we can, right? We're going to keep going a little bit longer here. So let me do some quick questions just to make sure we've covered them. So a question here, is the state government taking any steps to protect Vermonters from their stimulus checks being garnished for private debts? I think we said yes, we're working on it, but we haven't fixed it yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's a couple different forms of collection activity. There's wage garnishment, which will always require a hearing where you'll be served notice of that hearing. Those hearings are not going to be scheduled right now because they're just not considered an emergency hearing. And as I said, the courts are only doing emergency hearings right now. So for wage garnishment, number one, you'll receive notice about that. And number two, those hearings are not going to be scheduled until the emergency order is lifted. For bank account garnishment, those don't require a hearing. However, your banks usually will notify you and say, hey, this creditor has just contacted us trying to take money out of your bank account. If that happens to you, you should call us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so next quick question. I think we answered this. What if the bank account the IRS has on file for direct deposit has been closed? Will the stimulus check bounce back and be issued in a paper check? Our answer was yes. That's exactly what will happen.
That is correct.
Okay.
And I'll just reiterate that Get My Payment portal, unfortunately, will not allow you to update your bank account information because the IRS is too concerned with fraudulent activity. The only
Got
way
it.
to change bank account information would be to e-file a tax return right
Okay.
now. So if you've
Got
not
it.
filed your 2019 tax return and you're required to do so, if you need to update your bank account information, that's one more reason why you should get that return in as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Zach. So next question here, this is from Facebook. Will the money go on my Direct Express card that I used for my SSDI? And then when should people on Social Security expect to see a deposit in their account?
Yes. So it's my understanding that the Direct Express cards will be loaded with the stimulus money. So as we said, any form that you usually expect your benefit or your tax refund to come to you as, that can be the way that you expect the stimulus check to come. The Get My Payment portal is a way for you to track that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to get reports about some of the messages that are coming back on that portal. So it might say status not available, and that scares a lot of people. But the portal updates once per day. With the Social Security Administration benefits recipients, this is a new information sharing, and it's taking time for the IRS to get that information from the Social Security Administration. So my advice would be to check Get My Payment, and if it comes back as saying status not available, I wouldn't stress too much about it right now. They update that portal once a day. So just check back the next day. And so these payments are going out as quickly as possible. Some people have already received them by direct deposit. If you're getting it electronically, either through a Direct Express card or directly into your bank account, then that should be within the next couple weeks. People who are expecting to get a paper check in the mail, that's going to take a bit more time just because of the capacity issues. You know, there's like 70 million people in this country who are expecting to get their check in paper form. I think the IRS can only issue about 5 million checks per week. So you're looking at over 10 weeks before everybody gets their paper check. For direct deposit, though, for electronically, I would say within the next couple weeks into early May is when you can expect to get your stimulus check. And the Get My Payment portal is where you would go to track that.
Great. Thank you, Zach. We did have two questions on that, the exact question. What if we get the message according to information that we have on file, we cannot determine your eligibility? Or what happens if I just logged in and it said information not available? So the answer is they're going to keep updating those and it should change soon, but there's nothing you should do to fix that right now. That's not a
Yeah,
problem
and
yet.
so this is like, this portal is brand new, right? So I'm learning about it and I'm hearing what's happening as well. But I've got a list of things that status not available may mean for you. So it could mean that you're not eligible for a payment. There are people who think maybe I was claimed as a dependent on somebody's tax return. That is very possible. That's something we're really concerned about, and we're trying to figure out how we can help those people. If you think you were claimed as a dependent and that's why you're not getting your stimulus check and you disagree with that, call us and we can see what we can do. So it may be that you're not eligible. It may be that you were required to file a tax return in 2018 or 19 and the IRS doesn't have that information. It may mean that you've recently filed your tax return and the IRS hasn't processed it yet. It may mean that you're a Social Security Administration beneficiary and the SSA has just not gotten all of that information to the IRS. So there's a lot of different reasons why you might get that status not available. I would just caution people to not jump to a conclusion just yet. It updates once per day. And unfortunately, we're just going to have to be patient and see how the situation plays out.
Got it. Okay, more quick questions, less than one sentence answers here. So how are they dealing with children under 17 that receive Social Security disability income? Are those folks also getting the $500?
Yes. So the
Great.
only requirements to receive the additional $500 are the child has to be a qualifying dependent, and there's some rules about that, about them living with you for over half the year, that you're providing over half of their support, etc. And then the big one is that they have to be under the age of 17 at the end of the tax year. Now, we've seen that maybe a child also has a Direct Express card. I believe that the $500 for that child will go on the primary taxpayer or primary household member adult's Direct Express card. I don't I don't believe that that Direct Express card for the child will be loaded with that $500.
Great. Zach, another quick question here. I hope, what if divorced parents are taking turns claiming their children on their taxes? For example, one parent did taxes in 2018 and it was his child year and he claimed the kids. And then in 2019, the other parent did taxes and that was their turn to claim the children. Who would get this child credit, the $500 per dependent
That
child
is
under 17?
it's a really good question. And the short answer is we're not totally sure.
Okay.
What we think is happening right now is we think the IRS is starting with people who have 2019 tax return information on file, and they'll probably start processing stimulus checks based on 2019 before moving to 2018. We anticipate that the IRS will only send a stimulus check once per social security number. So if they issue a $500 dependent stimulus amount for that one social security number, then the person who had that child in 2018 will probably not get that, but we're not quite sure. And the law is also written to hopefully allow the people who are splitting years. So if the parent had the child in 2020, when they go to file their 2020 tax return, hopefully they will then be eligible to get that additional $500 then. But there is a lot of gray area here, and it just depends on how the IRS computers process these stimulus checks depending on what tax year they're using.
So it sounds like we think that the 2019 filer who claimed the person, that claimed the child, will get the $500. We think, and that possibly the other person, if they're alternating, might get it when they file their 2020 taxes next year, but we just don't know quite yet.
Correct.
Okay, great. Next quick question. If a person filed extensions in 2018 or 2019, do they need to complete some kind of form? Now, I don't understand if this person filed an extension in 2018, but then eventually did file the 2018 taxes or 2019 taxes, or if this is someone who hasn't filed at all. But is there some other form for folks that have filed extensions?
So if you're required to file a tax return, then you'll need to file a tax return to get the stimulus check. If there's no 2019 tax return on file, then the IRS will use 2018. You can think about what the information on 2018 versus 2019 looks like, and if that may get you more money, and decide whether you want to get 2019 in right now or wait. The bottom line is that if 2018 has already been filed, that's fine. That's all you need to do to get your stimulus check. But if you've not filed a tax return and you're required to, you need to get one of them in.
Got it. Okay. So as long as you filed 2018 or 2019 or both, you're in a good spot.
Correct.
Okay, let's see. Next question, just quickly, the Social Security Administration is sharing current bank account information for direct deposit. Is that true?
That is our understanding right now.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Next question, can someone do the non-filer information for someone else who doesn't have access to the internet? So if you've got, so can someone help someone else out by helping them access that page?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think we're struggling with that at Legal Aid as well. For people who are helping people that they know and are able to sit down with them in person and verify that this is the person they say they are. So, I mean, generally, like if you can verify the person's identity through their identity documents and you have all of that information available, I am struggling to see what the issue may be here. For me personally, I think one of the big issues is how we will be able to verify people's identities remotely before we help them input that information into the portal. And we're working through some of those concerns. But I don't believe there's any requirement that, you know, you have to enter your information specifically. It's just a question of making sure that you're getting the right information and that this is the person they're saying they are.
Thank you, Zach. So next question is the income cutoff that's $75,000 or $150,000. Is that gross income or is that adjusted gross income?
Yeah, I believe it's gross income.
Okay.
I need to double check that.
You double check that while I go on to the next question here.
Sounds good.
Oh, this is a quick one. What is a non-tax filer? What does that phrase mean? A non-tax filer?
Yeah, a non-tax filer is simply anybody who has not filed a tax return. You can be a non-filer even though you're required to file a tax return. But when we use the word non-filer and the way the IRS uses that word non-filer, they're using it in terms of people who are non-filers because they're not required to file a tax return. So these are people whose sole source of income is a Social Security benefit, is a veteran's benefit, or is reach up or general assistance. These are people who just don't make enough money to be required to file tax returns. And if you're not required to file a tax return, you probably will not be doing so. It's not necessarily a fun experience.
Got it. Okay. So let me know when you find the answer to, is this your adjusted gross income or your gross income? And in the meantime, I'll be coming up to other questions here. Just to confirm, this person doesn't see SSI on the list of non-filers who don't need to do anything. So we just confirmed that SSI actually is on the list of non-filers,
Yes.
unless
And
you have
Amelia,
someone who's a
I
dependent.
did just find it is adjusted gross income up to
Oh, great.
$75,000. Sorry
Great. So
about
it's
that.
adjusted gross income up to $75,000 or $150,000 if it's a joint filing couple. That's great. That's exciting. That's better. Okay, so this person says, my 2018 direct deposit was correct and my 2019 was wrong.
Yeah. So it depends how that 2019 direct deposit information was wrong. If it just is an inactive bank account or an account number that's wrong, so it's not depositing money, then hopefully it will revert to 2018. I have heard some reports that they'll use the direct deposit information that's on file for 18 if 19 doesn't have it. But we're not quite sure. And unfortunately, there is no way to quickly change direct deposit information short of e-filing a tax return. And even then, I don't know how long it's taking for the IRS to process returns, even if they're electronically filed.
Thanks, Zach. Quick question here that I can answer. Will this town hall info be accessible as a recording that others can watch if they miss the live version? So yes, this will be accessible on the Vermont Legal Aid Facebook page. Shortly after this is done, we will also have a link on our webpage as well. So folks will be able to watch the recording afterwards. And again, if someone has a question that we're not answering, you can always call our phone number at 1-800-889-2047 and leave us a quick voicemail with your question. Let's see, beware of scams, agreed. So there was a question here. If I just had a baby, can I get the stimulus $500 now, or do I have to wait until next year?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is a situation where this person would be entitled to that extra $500. Unfortunately, the IRS doesn't know that you had a baby and won't know until next year when you file your 2020 tax return. So
Okay.
while you will qualify for your stimulus check now, that extra $500 for your new baby that was born in 2020 won't come to the IRS's attention until you file your tax return next year. But you will get that extra $500 next year.
Great, thank you. One more question here. My father passed away in 2018, so my mother received $2,400. Will she have to return the money since she will file single instead of married for 2019?
Yeah, so the short answer is no, she will not have to pay back any of this money. The law specifically is written to say that you will not be required to pay back any money that you receive. And that's great that the IRS is issuing these checks, even if one of the Social Security numbers in a joint return is actually deceased.
Okay.
But no, they will not have to pay it back.
Thank you. There's one other question I want to make sure we get to because I'm still curious about it. The question is there, can you clarify the difference between not having to pay back the stimulus check versus the impact on your 2020 taxes if you owe any tax money to the IRS?
Yeah, so this is, so the stimulus check is a refundable credit at its essence. And a refundable credit means that you get whatever amount of the credit is left over after you've satisfied whatever tax deficiency. So this is very similar to an earned income tax credit, where if I file my tax return, it says that I owe $500 in taxes, but I get a $1,200 in stimulus refundable credit. Part of that stimulus refundable credit will go to pay my tax liability, but then I'll get whatever's left over refunded to me, which is the refundable part of the credit. So I think what they're saying is when I go to file my 2020 tax return, yes, part of this stimulus check will be held by the IRS if you have a tax deficiency, but you will get whatever's left over from that.
So this isn't increasing or decreasing the amount of taxes you owe in 2020. though it could
No,
increase it if they actually owe you more. Or it
correct.
could increase how much you get. Okay, got
It
it.
could increase, yes, it could increase the amount of refund that you can expect, or depending on how much you owe, it can substantially decrease the amount of tax liability you're facing.
Thank you. So I think we're getting really close to it. We've got 56 questions I think that we've answered here, which is wild. And we're reaching, I think, the end of our time together today. We are going to have more of these town halls and other crucial coronavirus pandemic crisis related questions. I know we're thinking about unemployment for next Thursday at 10 a.m. Let's see if I have any other questions here. I think we've really almost gotten all of them. I'm just scrolling through and I'm seeing that we've really covered this. And again, if we didn't get to your question, if I missed it somehow, definitely give us a call. Go to our website, see if you can find the answer there and give us a call. This one is, my son was a dependent in 2018, but he was not a dependent in 2019. If this is based on 2018, he will not be eligible, but if he files as 2019, he will be eligible. So I'm guessing the answer is he should file right now. Is that right?
So it's a little unclear if she's talking about his eligibility
Mm,
or her eligibility to get that extra $500.
okay.
So if she filed a tax return in 2018 claiming him as a dependent, and she has not filed the 2019 tax return, then hypothetically she should get that extra $500 additional qualifying child stimulus. However, that would disqualify her son from receiving his own $1,200 check. If he files his 2019 tax return as a primary taxpayer, no longer a dependent, then he should be eligible. And as we've said, we think the IRS is processing these stimulus checks in order of what tax year do they have, starting with 2019. And what we think is going to happen here, and as I said, this is still evolving, but the IRS computer is very good at only issuing money connected to a social security number once. So if your son were to file a 2019 tax return as a primary taxpayer, hopefully he will get his $1,200 stimulus check. But that may also mean that because his social security number has already been checked off by the IRS, that will probably mean that you won't get a $500 dependent stimulus credit for him from the year prior. But as I said, we're not really sure the choices that were made when the IRS programmed this computer to start issuing these checks. So it could happen, I guess, but generally we think if your social security number is used once by the IRS, you will probably not get it again.
Thank you, Zach. There's a question here about an Emerald card for folks who use H&R Block. So some H&R Block customers that use their Emerald cards to get an advance on their tax returns in 2019 are being told that their stimulus checks will be delayed, and then H&R Block is waiting to hear from the IRS about how these funds will get to them. Any advice for these folks? I know that, of course, if we don't have a clear answer, people should be calling us for sure, but any advice for folks that are using that Emerald card?
Yeah, so I think what an Emerald card is if I'm not mistaken, is there are tax preparation services that will pretty much give you an advance on your tax refund, and in return they will put down their own direct deposit information. So they give you the check, they file your refund, but that tax return has the H&R Block banking information on it. So the IRS would hypothetically issue the stimulus check to H&R Block, which is not what we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
This is an evolving area, and we don't necessarily have a good answer right now. It's good that H&R Block is trying to figure out how to work with the IRS to make sure people get their checks. We're not sure how they're going to handle it. If it was a 2018 tax return, you could e-file 2019 as quickly as possible to see if you can get your bank account information on file for 2019. But short of that, it's going to be up to how the IRS directs H&R Block and all these other tax preparers who issue advanced checks and then get the direct deposit, how they handle that. And we'll update our website as we learn more about that.
Okay, and one last question. I want to end on a happy note here. What if you had a baby in 2020 and are considered a non-filer? How will the stimulus money be delivered if you don't make enough to file a tax return next year? So first of all, congratulations on the baby.
Yes.
And so if you don't make enough to file a tax return next year. My understanding, maybe I'm wrong, is that anyone can file a tax return just for fun, even if they don't make any income at all. Not many folks choose to do that, but what's the answer here? If you had a baby in 2020, you don't usually file, you don't usually make enough money to have to file. What can you do?
Yeah, so if you had a baby in 2020, the IRS doesn't know about it yet. So when you file your tax return in this coming or next spring, and you file your 2020 tax return, you'll let the IRS know that you had a baby, and you will get whatever stimulus you didn't get now. Now, if you're a non-filer, that could mean a bunch of different things, as we said. If you receive a Social Security Administration benefit like SSI, SSDI, Social Security retirement, or railroad benefits, you will automatically get your own $1,200 stimulus check. If you're a non-filer who's just not required to file and you're not receiving any of those benefits, you will have to use the non-filer portal and provide your information to IRS so that they know you're out there and you qualify. And the other thing here is that if you're earning any sort of income, if you're working and you're just below the filing threshold, you have a baby now, you should file a tax return because there's other credits and tax benefits for you if you file that tax return. So you might be surprised when you file your tax return in 2020 that you'll get not only potentially some stimulus money, but maybe even earned income credit, depending on if you worked or not and those sorts of things. So just because you're not required to file doesn't mean that you shouldn't file. And in fact, maybe you should.
Thank you, Zach. So I said I would end there with a baby, but one last thing. We've got a question here about translation. So the IRS.gov is only translating this page into Spanish, but as Vermont Legal Aid, we are getting our information about these stimulus checks translated into 7 or 8 other languages. So keep an eye out for that. They'll be on our website and we'll be sharing them hopefully on Facebook as well. So we are going to have this information translated for Vermonters that have need for this information in another language about these stimulus checks. Zach, as I understand that the IRS is struggling even to have enough staff and enough space with to get really to any of this. And so translation's been one thing that they're not able to do much of yet. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the IRS has always had struggles with getting forms and information translated. They've got some translation in Spanish on their website for this, but they don't even have tax forms that are translated into Spanish that you can use. So we are trying to get translation done for our for the materials that we've drafted. And if there's barriers there, certainly let us know and we can try and address those as well.
Thanks, Zach. And I'm sorry, I keep saying one more question. We're at 60 questions and I've got a 61st. So this is a question from Facebook. Just before we wrap up here, did the IRS give an official date as to when they stopped processing paper tax returns for 2019? They're supposed to keep doing it again. They're just sort of paused on it. And Vermont, is Vermont still processing paper tax returns? Are they also paused? Are they stopping?
Right. So the first thing is that the tax filing deadline has been extended to July 15th. So even if they're not processing the returns, you still need to get that return in by July 15th. That is the filing deadline, or else you can expect to be potentially penalized. I don't know if the Vermont Department of Tax is processing paper returns right now or not. I know that all of these state and federal agencies are in scramble mode right now. And just like many other workforces, a substantial portion of the Department of Tax and the IRS have had to figure out how they're working from home and all of the other technological issues that go along with it. So the IRS has said that they are not processing paper returns right now.
Got it.
That is all we really know about that. If you mail in a paper return, that is fine. I don't know if it'll get kicked back in the mail. If you do mail in a paper return and the date that you mail that return is important, I would either mail it certified or I would figure out some other way to have proof that you mailed it on the date that you said you did. Yes, the deadline is July 15th, and that's really all we know about the filing deadline right now.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach. Thank you everyone that tuned in here. Thank you everyone who's watching this later as we post it on our Facebook page and on our webpage. That's www.vtlawhelp.org. It's 11 o'clock, so we've actually made it to an hour. So we had our
An hour
first
town
half
hall.
hour of the healthcare town hall, and now we did an additional bonus 30 minutes of Q&A session with tax attorney Zach Leese. So thank you so much, Zach, for your time. It's been wonderful getting to chat with you today, and I'm looking forward to our next town hall on next Thursday at 10 a.m. I think is our plan. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you so much for all of our questioners. We had over 60 fantastic questions, and I'm really grateful that we got to answer them. Remember to check out our webpage. Keep an eye out for a translated version of the information. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks.